Hi, my name's Deanna Fox, and we're here at Different Drummers Kitchen in Albany. And today it's all about comfort food. So we're going to be making biscuits 3 ways. We're going to start with a basic biscuit recipe, and I'm going to teach you how to incorporate some savory ingredients for a cheddar dill biscuit, and also to make a sweet biscuit for shortcakes and desserts. So what we need today is pretty basic. Biscuits are pretty easy ingredients. So we just need all-purpose flour, a little bit of baking powder, salt, butter, milk, and then an egg with a little bit of water for an egg wash at the end. So you want to make sure your oven is at 425 degrees Fahrenheit. I have a baking stone in there that I'm going to cook my biscuits on that's preheating, but you can use just a cookie sheet or a half sheet pan if you'd like. So let's get started. So we don't need to sift our flour or anything. We're just going to kind of fluff it a little bit to make sure that it's not compacted. And we need 4 cups. Okay, so there's our 4 cups of flour. And to that we're gonna add our baking powder. Make sure it's baking powder and not baking soda. And if you find a baking powder that you like, try to stick with that because it can change a little bit based on the brand. We also have a little bit of salt, and that's it for our dry ingredients. So we're just gonna fluff our dry ingredients a little bit with a pastry blade, just to incorporate it. And then we're gonna use butter, good stuff. So we're just gonna kind of break up our butter. This is non-salted butter, so we're gonna just break it up into chunks, and it's pretty cold still. It's a little bit soft. And you don't need to worry about breaking it up too much because we're gonna cut it in with our pastry blade. And your hands are gonna feel really soft after this. So there's our butter. And just kind of fluff the butter around with your pastry blade into the dry ingredients because you don't want it to stick too much to your blade. So we're just gonna cut it in. And what I mean by cutting in is that we're gonna make the butter soft and small into our dry ingredients. So a good rule of thumb to know if you've got it right is when your butter and flour look like peas and sand. So very precise unit of measure, peas and sand. Basically, you just want it to look kind of loose, like this. You have some big pieces in here, but for the most part, it's pretty well incorporated. So now we're gonna add in our milk. You wanna measure out 2 cups of milk, but you're probably not gonna use all your milk. It depends on what's happening in your kitchen that day, if it's humid, if it's dry, how fresh your flour is. So you might need more and you might need less. So a good way to start is to add in about 3/4 of your milk. So in this case, that equals 1.5 cups. And then just kind of stir it around. Use your hands if it feels better. Depends on if you want a claw hand or not with everything sticking to it. So we added in actually about half our milk at that point, and you can see it's still pretty dry. So we're gonna add in a touch more. And make sure you're scraping the bottom of your bowl pretty well so you get all the dry ingredients up. And you really want to be sure not to get your dough too wet or else it won't rise and have those pretty flaky layers that everybody craves with their biscuits. So this is looking pretty good. So I'm going to clear off a few ingredient bowls here. Make sure you scrape everything off. You want all those bits of butter. You can roll your biscuits out onto a cutting board or right onto your counter, whatever you prefer, but just put down a good helping of flour. And then come in here with your biscuit dough. And there it goes. Now you could use a rolling pin if you wanted to, but I feel like it overworks the gluten in the flour a little bit too much. So I'm just gonna use my hands, add a little bit more flour to the top. We're gonna press this out to about 3/4 of an inch. It doesn't have to be perfect. And you can see all the bits of butter in there. That's gonna give it nice flaky layers. So now here's the trick. When people think biscuits, they think these beautiful, flaky, luscious layers that just kind of fall apart, just waiting for jam or honey. But it's kind of hard. This is pretty dense, and you're not going to get a lot of layers this way. So my trick is to fold it. So I fold it over a couple of times, and then just push it right back out. If you feel like it's sticking to your board or sticking to your hands, add more flour. We're going to do it this way. There's some butter, don't lose that. What we're doing here is very similar to if you were making a croissant dough or even some pâte brisée, which is kind of your basic pastry dough. So it's a kind of a classic French technique that kind of came to America and became the biscuit. So if you were making croissant dough, you'd start off with your basic dough and you'd add butter in just as we had, and you'd keep folding it over and rolling to incorporate the butter, and fold and roll, and that's how you get those layers when you have croissant or you know, pain au chocolat or something like that. So here we are with our biscuit dough. Now if you wanted to make these sweet, when you were doing your dry ingredients, you would add in 2 tablespoons of sugar, and that's it. And that makes a really delicious biscuit for like a strawberry shortcake or a sundae. And if you wanted to make these savory, you would add in kind of whatever savory ingredients you wanted to. Today I have some delicious aged cheddar and some dill. You would just grate in some cheddar and chop up dill. You could use fresh or you could use dried. And you would just add it right in before you add your milk. So there's that. So now we're going to cut our biscuits. So you can really make your biscuits any size, but just be warned that if you make them too big, you might not get the rise and the layers that you want. So we have about a 3-inch pastry cutter here. So when you're going in on your biscuit, don't twist your biscuit cutter because you're going to compact those layers that we just worked really hard to create. So go straight down and straight up. And you can kind of see already we have some layers happening here. So we'll just set those aside and bring this over here and just knock them out. Take your scraps and just fold them back over like we did in the beginning. And really the more kind of scraps and folding and layers that you get, the more layers you're going to get when you bake them. All right, maybe we'll get 2 more out of this batch. We'll see. There's one. And this is what I call the ugly stepchild under the stairs biscuit because it's kind of the lumpy scrap one that the chef gets to eat before anybody else comes into the kitchen. So you're just making a little ball about the same size as the rest of your biscuits with your scraps. So we're just making a quick egg wash to glaze the top of our biscuits. It's going to help them brown. It's just 1 egg and about a tablespoon of water, and you just mix it with a fork. And then you can use a fork, a spoon, your fingers. I have a silicone pastry brush that I'm going to use today. And you just go over the tops. You don't want to do anything too heavy. You don't want to make your biscuit wet. You just want to kind of lightly glaze them, just to give them some color in the oven. So now I have a baking stone in the oven that I'm going to pull out. And I really like to use the baking stone because it gets a nice hot bottom and kind of sears the bottom of the biscuit so the biscuit doesn't steam on the bottom. So I'm going to pull that out. So this is really hot. It's been in our 425-degree oven. And we're just gonna try not to crowd your biscuits in too much. They can be touching. Touching is okay. If you had more biscuits, if you made an extra a bigger batch of this or you made them a different size and they were touching, that's completely fine. The only thing is that where they're touching won't crisp up as much, so you'll have a slightly softer finished product. So these are going to go back in our oven. We're going to let our biscuits cook for about 15 minutes or until they're golden brown. It depends on the temperature in your oven, but 15 to 20 minutes is a good standard rule. And when they're nice and golden brown and they're fluffy and have all those delicious layers, you're ready to pull them out. I always get really excited when my biscuits turn out good. It doesn't matter how many I've made. It's always exciting. And here they are. So be careful because this is very hot, and you want to get them off the stone pretty quickly, or your baking sheet, because you don't want them to steam. So they should slide right off for you. So I'm just going to let these cool for a few minutes, and then you can kind of top them with whatever you want. These are our plain biscuits, so if I was going to indulge at home, I would take the ugly one that we had and slather it with butter and honey or a little homemade jam. They're really good. They're light and they're buttery and they're flaky. And because we cooked them on our baking sheet, or our baking stone, excuse me, they have a crunchy bottom. Make these at home, they are so good. So you can find the recipe for this and much more at farmfreshmarket.com.